The dust-laden wind swept through the desolate streets of Elko, Nevada in 1876 as Xavier Stone rode in on his midnight stallion, known to most simply as the Ghost. The name was fitting for a man whose reputation cast a long shadow across the West, a gunslinger, whose exploits had become the stuff of dime novels, though few knew the man behind the legend. As he dismounted outside the saloon, he noticed something peculiar. A wanted poster fluttering in the breeze, bearing the face of a woman whose eyes, even in crude ink, held something that Xavier recognized all too well: desperation mixed with defiance. Xavier tore the poster from the post, studying the image. The woman, Nora Daniels, was wanted for the murder of a prominent banker in Carson City. The reward, $500, would tempt many men in these parts. He crumpled the paper and tossed it aside, not knowing then how this small action would alter the course of his life. The saloon was typical of frontier establishments, smoke-filled, raucous with the sound of clinking glasses and boisterous laughter. Xavier took a seat at a corner table, back to the wall, facing the door as he always did. Habits formed from years on the run died hard. "Whiskey," he told the barmaid who approached, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. "You're him, ain't you?" she asked quietly as she set down the glass. "Stone, the ghostwriter." Xavier didn't confirm or deny, simply sliding a coin across the worn wood of the table. "Heard anything interesting lately?" he asked, a routine question that often yielded useful information. The woman glanced nervously around before leaning closer. "Marshall's got a posse together, looking for that Daniels woman from the poster. Word is, she's hiding somewhere in the hills north of town." Xavier nodded slightly, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "Why so interested in one woman?" "They say she killed Judge Richardson's brother-in-law over in Carson City, shot him dead in his own office." The barmaid straightened up. "Judge has friends in high places, wants her brought in, or brought down." This piqued Xavier's interest. Judge Richardson was known to be corrupt, using his position to benefit wealthy friends and crush opponents. If this woman had crossed him, perhaps there was more to the story than a simple murder. As the night wore on, Xavier listened to the talk around him. Most was the usual saloon chatter, complaints about cattle prices, boasts of conquests both real and imagined, but occasionally the conversation turned to the fugitive woman. The stories varied. She was a cold-blooded killer. She was a victim of circumstance. She had stolen a fortune in gold. She was innocent but framed by powerful men. By morning, Xavier had made his decision. He would find this woman before the posse did, not to claim the reward, but to discover the truth. The hills north of Elko were rugged, dotted with scrub pine and rocky outcroppings, perfect country for hiding. Xavier followed game trails, looking for signs of human passage, broken branches, disturbed stones, anything out of place in the natural environment. On the second day, he found what he was looking for: the remnants of a small fire, carefully built to minimize smoke, and a partial footprint too small to belong to a man. She was here, or had been recently. Xavier continued his search methodically, working in an expanding spiral from the campsite. As dusk approached, he spotted a flicker of movement in a rocky crevice that would have been easy to miss if not for his trained eye. He approached cautiously, hand resting lightly on the grip of his Colt. "I know you're there," he called out, his voice carrying in the still mountain air. "I'm alone, not with the posse." Silence stretched between them. Then a woman's voice, steady despite the situation. "You're Stone. I recognized your horse." "Then you know I could have brought that posse straight to you if I wanted to." After a moment's hesitation, a figure emerged from the shadows. Nora Daniels was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25, with auburn hair hastily tied back and intelligent green eyes that assessed him warily. She held a small revolver pointed at his chest. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Information," Xavier replied honestly, making no move toward his weapon. "That poster says you killed a man, did you?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes." Xavier nodded, impressed by her directness. Why? Because he was going to kill me first. She stepped forward slightly, the fading light revealing a bruise on her jaw. Edward Mason was no innocent banker. He was a monster who used his position to prey on women who couldn't fight back. And you could. I had to. Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of vulnerability. No one else would stop him. Xavier considered her for a long moment. Many men he'd met were skilled liars, but there was a rawness to her pain that rang true. The law won't see it that way, not with Judge Richardson involved. I know, she said, finally lowering her gun, but I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. Xavier made a decision then, one that went against his usual policy of staying uninvolved. I'm going to help you, he stated simply. Nora's eyes widened with surprise. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough about Judge Richardson to know that if he wants you dead, you deserve a fair chance. Xavier glanced at the darkening sky. Night's coming. We should make camp further up, away from this spot. They'll be searching these lower areas first. Reluctantly, Nora agreed, and they made their way higher into the hills, finding shelter in a small cave. Xavier built a fire far enough inside that the light wouldn't be visible from below. As they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Nora gradually revealed her story. She had been working as a secretary at Mason's bank. At first, he seemed kind, offering her the position when she desperately needed work after her father's death left her with mounting debts. But soon, Mason's true nature emerged: unwanted advances, threats when she refused him, and finally an attack in the bank after hours that she had barely escaped. I reported it to the sheriff, Nora explained, staring into the fire. He smiled and said he'd look into it. The next day, I was fired. No one would hire me. Mason told everyone I'd stolen from the bank. Xavier listened silently, recognizing the familiar pattern of powerful men protecting each other. I was planning to leave town, but I needed money. I went back to the bank after closing to collect my final wages that Mason had withheld. Nora's voice grew quieter. He was there, said he'd been waiting for me, that no one would believe anything I said against him. He had a knife. She unconsciously touched her side, where Xavier could now see a partially healed cut. I got to his desk drawer where he kept a gun. I didn't think I just fired. Self-defense, Xavier said. Try telling that to Judge Richardson. Mason was married to his sister. Nora looked up at him, her expression hardening. I didn't run because I'm guilty. I ran because I knew I'd never get a fair trial. Xavier nodded. He'd seen enough corrupt justice to know she was right. Get some rest, he advised. Tomorrow we need to figure out our next move. As Nora slept, Xavier kept watch, turning over their options in his mind. The obvious solution was to help her flee the territory, perhaps to California or even Mexico. But that would mean a life of constant looking over her shoulder. No, what Nora needed was vindication proof that Mason had been the villain, not her. Morning came with the sound of distant voices and dogs barking. The posse was getting closer. We need to move, Xavier said, quickly erasing all signs of their camp. They've brought tracking dogs. They headed higher into the mountains, taking care to cross streams whenever possible to throw off the scent. By midday, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but Xavier knew it was only temporary. The posse would regroup and continue the search. As they rested by a small stream, Xavier outlined his thoughts. Running isn't enough. You need to clear your name. Nora looked at him skeptically. How? It's my word against a dead man's reputation. Men like Mason rarely prey on just one woman, Xavier replied. If we can find others he victimized, build a case strong enough that even Richardson can't ignore it. That would mean going back, Nora pointed out, into town where I'm wanted dead or alive. Xavier nodded. It's risky, but I have contacts, people who owe me favors. Why would you do this for me? Nora asked again, studying his face intently. You've built your reputation on not getting involved in other people's problems. Xavier was silent for a moment, considering her question. Finally, he said, Maybe I'm tired of riding away. That evening, they made camp in a dense copse of trees. As Xavier prepared a rabbit he'd snared for their dinner, Nora watched him with curiosity. "How did you become the ghost?" she asked. "The stories about you, are they true?" Xavier smiled faintly. "Some, most are exaggerated. They say you've killed 20 men. Fewer," he replied, "and never without cause. They say you were once a lawman before something happened that turned you against the badge." At this, Xavier's expression darkened. "That part's true enough." Sensing his reluctance, Nora didn't press further. Instead, she helped him prepare their meal, working alongside him in comfortable silence. There was something refreshing about her directness, her lack of pretense. Most women Xavier encountered either feared him or were drawn to his notorious reputation. Nora seemed to see past both. As they ate, Xavier explained his plan. "There's a woman in Elko, Martha Cooper, runs a boarding house for working women. She hears things, knows secrets most folks don't. If anyone knows about Mason's other victims, it would be her." "And you think she'll help us?" "I once helped her son when he got into trouble with some cattle rustlers. She's discreet and no friend to men like Mason or Richardson." Xavier paused. "But reaching her means getting you into town unnoticed." Nora considered this. "I could cut my hair, dress as a boy." Xavier shook his head. "Too risky. The posters have your face all over town." He thought for a moment. "There's an old mining tunnel that runs close to the edge of town. Used to be a way for miners to slip in and out without paying debts. It comes out near Martha's place." "You seem to know a lot about secret ways in and out of towns," Nora observed. "Useful knowledge in my line of work," Xavier replied with a slight smile. That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the dying fire, Xavier found himself unable to sleep. He was accustomed to solitude, to relying only on himself. This sudden alliance with Nora, this commitment to her cause, was uncharacteristic. Yet something about her story, about the injustice of her situation, had stirred something in him that he thought long buried, a sense of purpose. The next day brought clear skies and a decision to move toward town. They traveled carefully, using the cover of trees and ravines, avoiding the main trails. By dusk, they had reached the abandoned mine entrance, concealed by years of overgrowth. "It's been a while since I've been here," Xavier admitted, clearing away branches to reveal the dark opening. "Watch your step. These old supports might not be stable." The tunnel was damp and close, requiring them to move in single file, with Xavier leading the way by the light of a small lantern. Occasionally, they had to climb over cave-ins or wade through puddles of stagnant water. After what seemed like hours, they reached a wooden door, weathered but still intact. "This leads to a root cellar behind Martha's property," Xavier explained, working the rusted latch. "It might be locked from the other side." But the door swung open with a creak, revealing steps leading upward. They emerged into a small storage room filled with preserved foods and supplies. Above, they could hear the sounds of a busy household footsteps, muffled conversations, the clatter of dishes. Xavier moved cautiously to the interior door, listening for a moment before opening it slightly. The kitchen beyond was empty. "Wait here," he instructed Nora. "I'll find Martha." He slipped through the house like a shadow, avoiding the few women he saw going about their evening duties. Martha's office was at the front of the house, a small, neat room where she kept her accounts and conducted the business of running the boarding house. She looked up sharply when he entered, a hand moving instinctively toward a drawer where Xavier knew she kept a derringer. When she recognized him, surprise replaced alarm. "Xavier Stone," she said quietly. "You're the last person I expected to see tonight." "I need your help, Martha," he replied directly. "And your discretion." Martha studied him for a moment, then nodded. "For Caleb's sake, you have both. What kind of trouble are you in now?" "Not me. A woman named Nora Daniels." Martha's expression changed slightly at the name. "The one who shot Edward Mason? Half the territory's looking for her." "She shot him in self-defense," Xavier explained. "He attacked her, and I suspect she wasn't his first victim." Martha's lips thinned to a hard line. "No, She wasn't. She stood, moving to close her office door. I've heard whispers from girls who worked at that bank. Nothing they'd say publicly, they need their jobs too badly. But in private, she shook her head in disgust. I need to find women willing to testify about what Mason did, Xavier said. To build a case strong enough that not even Judge Richardson can sweep it away. Martha looked skeptical. That's asking a lot. Richardson has this town in his pocket. Speaking against his family could cost these women everything. And if they don't, an innocent woman will hang. Xavier leaned forward. She's here, Martha. I brought her through the old mine tunnel. Martha's eyes widened. In my house? You brought a wanted fugitive into my house? She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. Are you trying to get us all arrested? I had nowhere else to turn, Xavier admitted. She needs sanctuary while I gather evidence. Martha paced the small office, clearly torn. Finally, she sighed heavily. Bring her to the 3rd floor. There's an empty room at the end of the hall used to be storage. No one goes there. I'll bring food when I can. She fixed Xavier with a stern look. 3 days. That's all I can offer without risking everyone here. Thank you, Xavier said sincerely. I'll make it count. He returned to Nora and led her carefully through the house to the small room Martha had indicated. It was dusty and sparsely furnished, but it had a small window overlooking the back garden, and most importantly, it was safe. I'll be back tomorrow, Xavier told her. Martha will bring you what you need. Nora caught his arm as he turned to leave. Be careful. If they catch you helping me. They won't, he assured her, unexpectedly moved by her concern. Xavier spent the next day gathering information discreetly. He visited the saloon, listened to conversations, asked casual questions about Mason that wouldn't raise suspicion. He learned that the banker had been well respected publicly, but had gone through a surprising number of female employees over the years. Many had left town suddenly, with vague explanations. By evening, he had names 3 women who might have suffered Mason's unwanted attentions. One had moved to Sacramento, too far to reach in time. Another was now married to a local rancher and unlikely to speak out. But the third, a woman named Rebecca Taylor, now worked at a small dressmaker's shop on the edge of town. Xavier visited the shop just before closing, finding Rebecca alone, tidying up for the day. She was a slight woman with nervous hands and eyes that darted constantly to the door, as if expecting trouble. Miss Taylor, he began, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. I need to speak with you about Edward Mason. The color drained from her face at the name. I don't know anything about his death, she said quickly. I haven't worked at the bank in over a year. I'm not accusing you of anything, Xavier assured her. I'm trying to help someone who defended herself against him, someone who might hang because no one else will speak the truth about what kind of man he was. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clutched a bolt of fabric. Why would you care? Who are you? My name is Xavier Stone. I believe Mason attacked Nora Daniels, just as I suspect he may have attacked others before her. At the mention of Nora's name, something shifted in Rebecca's expression, a flash of recognition, perhaps even solidarity. Even if what you're saying is true, she said carefully, what good would it do for me to speak up now? It won't change what happened. It might save an innocent woman's life, Xavier replied, and prevent Judge Richardson from using her as an example to silence others. Rebecca was silent for a long moment. Finally she asked, Are there others? Women who will speak? I'm looking for them, Xavier said honestly. You'd be the first. She shook her head sadly. Then it would be my word against his memory, against his family. I'd lose everything again for nothing. Xavier didn't push further. He left his name and where he could be found if she changed her mind, then departed, disappointed but not surprised. Fear was a powerful motivator for silence. When he returned to the boarding house that night, he found Nora pacing the small room anxiously. Any luck? She asked immediately. Xavier shook his head, explaining his conversation with Rebecca. Without multiple witnesses, it's going to be difficult to build a compelling case. Nora sank onto the narrow bed, despair evident in her posture. So that's it? I either run forever or hang for defending myself. There's another option, Xavier said slowly, an idea forming. Mason kept detailed records at the bank. If he documented his employees, there might be a pattern: women who quit suddenly, complaints that were buried. Those records would be in his office, Nora pointed out, where I shot him. It's probably the most guarded building in town right now. During the day, yes. Xavier's expression was determined. But at night? Banks rely more on locks than guards, and locks can be opened. Nora stared at him. You want to break into the bank? The same bank where I'm accused of murdering someone? That's insane. Do you have a better idea? Xavier challenged. After a moment, Nora shook her head reluctantly. No, but I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, Xavier protested. It's too dangerous. I worked there, Nora countered. I know where Mason kept his private files. You could waste hours searching on your own. Her expression hardened with determination. Besides, it's my life at stake. I have the right to fight for it. Xavier recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew arguing would be pointless. Fine, but you follow my lead, exactly as I say. They planned the break-in carefully. Martha, though disapproving, provided them with information about the night watchman's rounds and the current security at the bank. Xavier scouted the building during the day, noting entrances and exits, the positions of windows, the pattern of people coming and going. 2 nights later, they made their move. Dressed in dark clothing, they slipped through the shadows of Elko's back alleys toward the bank. The main street was nearly deserted at this late hour, with only the saloon still showing lights and activity. The bank's back door was their target, less visible from the street, and secured with a simple lock that Xavier could pick given enough time. Nora kept watch while he worked, her breath coming in short, nervous gasps that clouded in the cool night air. Steady, Xavier murmured. Breathe slower, in and out. She nodded, making a visible effort to control her breathing as Xavier continued to work on the lock. After several tense minutes, there was a soft click, and the door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. They slipped inside, into the darkness of the bank's back rooms. Nora led the way confidently, navigating through the familiar space to Mason's office. The door was sealed with official-looking paper evidence of the investigation into his death, but it tore easily as Xavier pushed the door open. The office was much as Nora had left it on that fateful day. The large desk dominated the room, a dark stain still visible on the carpet beside it, Mason's blood, now dried to a rusty brown. Nora paled at the sight, but steadied herself quickly. His personal records would be in the cabinet, she whispered, pointing to a tall filing cabinet against the wall. He kept it locked. Xavier made short work of this lock as well, revealing neatly organized files. They worked quickly, using a small lantern to examine documents, looking for anything that might help their case. Employment records showed exactly what they had hoped for: a pattern of young women hired, then leaving abruptly after short periods of employment. Look at this, Nora whispered, pulling out a leather-bound book from the bottom drawer of Mason's desk. His personal journal. The journal contained entries that made Nora's blood run cold, detailed, predatory observations about female employees, including Nora herself. Mason had documented his conquests and his strategies for silencing complaints. This is it, Xavier said, carefully wrapping the journal and selected files in a cloth. This is what we need. As they were preparing to leave, a noise from the front of the bank froze them in place, the sound of a key in the lock, followed by the creak of the front door opening. Night watchman, Xavier breathed. He's early. They doused their lantern and pressed themselves against the wall beside the office door, listening as heavy footsteps moved through the main room of the bank. The watchman was heading toward the back, toward them. Xavier's mind raced through their options. They couldn't go back the way they'd come. The watchman was between them and the rear exit. The windows in Mason's office were barred. They were trapped. The footsteps grew closer. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, Xavier could see Nora's terrified expression. If they were caught now, with evidence stolen from the bank, there would be no hope of proving her innocence. It would look like they were trying to destroy evidence of her guilt. Making a split-second decision, Xavier pulled Nora toward Mason's desk. "Hide underneath," he whispered urgently. "No matter what happens, stay silent." Nora hesitated only briefly before squeezing herself into the knee-hole of the massive desk, clutching their precious evidence. Xavier moved to the center of the room, drew his gun, and waited. The office door pushed open, and the night watchman entered, lantern raised. He was an older man, gray-haired and weather-beaten, with a revolver on his hip. His eyes widened in shock at the sight of Xavier. "Evening," Xavier said calmly, his gun steady. "Sorry to disturb your rounds." The watchman's hand moved toward his holster, but Xavier shook his head slightly. "I wouldn't. I have no quarrel with you, and I'd prefer not to hurt you." "You're him," the watchman said, recognition dawning. "Stone. The ghostwriter." His eyes narrowed. "You working with that Daniels woman, the one who killed Mr. Mason?" "I'm working toward the truth," Xavier replied. "Now, you have two choices. You can reach for that gun, in which case one of us won't leave this room alive. Or you can turn around, walk out, and continue your rounds. Pretend you never saw me." The watchman hesitated, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he said, "I've got a wife and grandchildren. Not worth dying over some bank papers." "Wise decision," Xavier acknowledged. The watchman backed slowly toward the door. "I'll give you 5 minutes before I raise the alarm, that's all." "Fair enough." When the watchman had disappeared down the hallway, Xavier helped Nora from her hiding place. "We need to move, now." They slipped out the back door and into the night, moving quickly but carefully through the shadows. They were nearly back to the boarding house when the alarm bell began to ring, its clanging shattering the quiet night. "They'll search the town," Xavier said grimly as they hurried through the old mine tunnel. "We need to leave Elko as soon as possible." Back in the safety of the small room, they examined their evidence more carefully. Mason's journal was damning detailed accounts of harassment, assaults, and even payoffs to keep victims quiet. The employment records showed a clear pattern that supported these accounts. And most importantly, they found letters from Judge Richardson advising Mason on how to handle troublesome women and offering legal protection. "This connects Richardson directly," Nora said, her voice tight with anger and vindication. "He knew what Mason was doing." "But we still need someone who will listen," Xavier pointed out. "Richardson controls the local law." "What about the territorial marshal?" Nora suggested. "His authority comes from Washington, not local politics." Xavier considered this. "Marshal Jenkins has a reputation for being honest, but his office is in Carson City where you're wanted for murder." "Then we need to get this evidence to him without me getting arrested first," Nora said determinedly. Dawn was breaking when Martha burst into the room, her face tense with worry. "The sheriff's deputized extra men. They're searching every building in town, starting with the south end. You have maybe an hour before they reach us." "We need horses," Xavier said, "and supplies for a hard ride." Martha hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do. Meet me at the stable behind the Mercantile in 30 minutes. My brother works there, he'll help." 30 minutes later, Xavier and Nora slipped out of the boarding house and made their way cautiously to the stable. Martha's brother, a taciturn man named Frank, was waiting with 2 saddled horses and basic provisions. "Take the north trail out of town," he advised. "Posse is focused on the south and east roads." They rode hard through the morning, pushing the horses as much as they dared. By noon, they had left Elko far behind, following the winding trail toward Carson City. They would need to approach the territorial marshal carefully, get the evidence to him without exposing Nora to immediate arrest. As they made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, Xavier noticed Nora watching him with an unreadable expression as he tended the small fire. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm trying to figure you out," she admitted. "You've risked everything to help me, a stranger." "Why?" Xavier was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire. Finally, he said, "I told you I was a lawman once." "In Texas," Nora supplied. "That much I've heard." "El Paso," he confirmed. "I believed in the law then, in justice." His expression darkened with memory. until a case much like yours. A young woman killed a prominent rancher who had attacked her. She came to me for help, bleeding and terrified. I believed her. Arrested the man's associates who had been involved. Xavier's voice grew distant. The territorial judge was the rancher's cousin. He threw out the case, declared the woman a murderous liar. Had me removed from my position when I protested. He looked up at Nora, his eyes reflecting the firelight. 3 days later, they found her hanging from a cottonwood tree outside town, called it suicide. No one questioned it. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. I should have done more, Xavier continued, protected her better. Instead, I just walked away, became this. He gestured vaguely at himself. A man with no permanent home, no connections, taking odd jobs, building a reputation based on violence. And now you're trying to make it right by helping me, Nora observed. Xavier shrugged, uncomfortable with her insight. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching the powerful crush anyone who stands in their way. Nora moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. Not many would risk what you have for a stranger. Something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, stirred emotions Xavier had long suppressed. He found himself noticing things he'd been trying to ignore, the delicate curve of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the courage that radiated from her despite everything she'd been through. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then Xavier cleared his throat and stood up. You should get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow. Nora nodded, a hint of disappointment crossing her face before she composed herself. Good night, Xavier. Good night, Nora. As she settled into her bedroll, Xavier took the first watch, his mind troubled by these new, unwelcome feelings. Attachment was dangerous in his line of work, dangerous for him, and deadly for anyone foolish enough to care about him. When this was over, when Nora was safe and vindicated, he would need to ride away. It was better for everyone that way. Yet, as he watched her sleeping form in the firelight, he wondered for the first time in years if there might be another path for him. They reached Carson City late the following day, approaching cautiously. The town was larger than Elko, with more law enforcement presence. Wanted posters bearing Nora's face were prominently displayed throughout the main street. We need a place to lay low while I make contact with Marshal Jenkins, Xavier said as they skirted the town's outskirts. Somewhere you won't be recognized. I know a place, Nora replied. There's a widow who lives on the edge of town, Mrs. Abernathy. She was kind to me when I first arrived in Carson City. Very private, keeps to herself. Her house is isolated enough that no one would notice extra visitors. The Abernathy house was a small, well-kept cabin, set back from the road, surrounded by cottonwood trees. The elderly woman who answered their knock was initially suspicious, but her face softened with recognition when she saw Nora. Good heavens, child, she exclaimed, quickly ushering them inside. You're all over the wanted posters. What are you doing back here? We need a place to stay, Mrs. Abernathy, Nora explained. Just for a day or two. I can explain everything. The older woman hesitated, looking between Nora and Xavier. Does it have to do with Edward Mason's death? Yes, Nora admitted, but not in the way people think. Mrs. Abernathy's expression hardened slightly. That man made inappropriate advances toward my granddaughter when she applied for a position at his bank. I believed her, though many didn't. She nodded decisively. You can stay in the back room. No one will look for you here. Once settled, Xavier outlined his plan to approach Marshal Jenkins. I'll go alone, he insisted when Nora began to protest. Jenkins knows me by reputation, if not personally. He's more likely to hear me out without immediately making an arrest. And if he doesn't? Nora challenged. If he decides to arrest you as my accomplice? Then you take the evidence and find another way, Xavier replied pragmatically. Mrs. Abernathy might help. Nora's face showed her frustration, but she recognized the logic of his plan. Be careful, she said finally. Richardson has influence beyond Elko. He might have poisoned the marshal against me already. Xavier left at dawn the next morning, dressed in his cleanest clothes to present a somewhat respectable appearance. The territorial marshal's office was a substantial building near the center of town, indicating the federal government's growing presence in the Nevada territory. Inside, he found a busy office with several deputy marshals at desks and wanted posters lining the walls. Nora's face was among them, prominently displayed. Xavier approached the front desk, where a young deputy was sorting through paperwork. "I need to speak with Marshal Jenkins," he stated. "It's important." The deputy looked up, taking in Xavier's weather-beaten appearance and the gun on his hip. "The marshal's busy. What's your business?" "Tell him Xavier Stone is here with information about the Nora Daniels case." The deputy's eyes widened slightly at the name. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into a back office. A few minutes later, a tall, broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard emerged. Marshal Jenkins had the look of a man who had seen much in his years enforcing the law, wary but not hardened, experienced but still capable of being surprised. "Stone," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Your reputation precedes you. Come into my office." The marshal's office was spartanly furnished with maps of the territory on the walls and neatly organized papers on the desk. Jenkins gestured to a chair, then sat behind his desk, studying Xavier with shrewd eyes. "You mentioned the Daniels woman," he said. "You know where she is?" "I know she's innocent," Xavier replied, not directly answering the question. Jenkins leaned back in his chair. "She shot a man dead in his office. Multiple witnesses saw her enter the bank. Only she came out alive." "In self-defense," Xavier countered. "Mason attacked her, and she wasn't his first victim." The marshal's expression remained neutral. "That's a serious accusation against a man who is highly respected in this community." "I have proof," Xavier said, producing the carefully wrapped journal and files. "Mason's own records. He documented everything: his attacks on female employees, his arrangements with Judge Richardson to cover up complaints." Jenkins accepted the documents with a skeptical expression that gradually shifted to concern as he examined the contents. The journal entries were explicit, detailing Mason's predatory behavior and Richardson's complicity. "Where did you get these?" Jenkins asked sharply. "Does it matter? They're genuine." "It matters if they were obtained illegally," the marshal pointed out. "Evidence collected improperly can't be used in court." "Then don't use these directly," Xavier suggested. "Use them to find his other victims. The names are all there. Interview them. Build your own case." Jenkins continued to read, his frown deepening. Finally, he looked up at Xavier. "Why are you involved in this? What's your stake?" "Justice," Xavier said simply. "Something I used to believe in." The marshal studied him for a long moment. "These journals contain serious allegations against Judge Richardson. If true, they suggest corruption at the highest level of our territorial court." "They're true," Jenkins sighed heavily. "I'll need time to verify this information, to speak with some of these women, see if they corroborate what's written here." "Time is something Nora Daniels doesn't have," Xavier reminded him. "There's a bounty on her head and a posse hunting her." "I can't simply dismiss murder charges based on stolen documents," Jenkins said firmly. "But," he continued as Xavier began to protest, "I can issue an order that she be brought in alive for questioning. No bounty collection without a live prisoner." It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Xavier nodded reluctantly. "How long will your investigation take?" "A week, perhaps 2. Jenkins stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll send deputies to interview these women immediately. In the meantime, if you happen to be in communication with Miss Daniels, you might suggest she turn herself in. I can guarantee her safety in my custody." Xavier left the marshal's office with mixed feelings. Jenkins seemed honest enough, but Xavier had learned the hard way that systems could corrupt even good men. And 2 weeks was a long time for Nora to remain hidden, especially with increased pressure to find her. As he made his way back to Mrs. Abernathy's house, he noticed increased activity among the local law enforcement, more deputies on the streets, checking travelers, examining faces against the wanted posters. News of his meeting with Jenkins had apparently spread quickly. "We need to move," he told Nora as soon as he returned. "Jenkins is investigating, but it will take time, and my visit has stirred up attention." Mrs. Abernathy, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up. "My sister has a place in Virginia City. It's a small house, but it's private. You'd be safe there while you wait." Virginia City, a bustling mining town about 20 miles from Carson City, offered the advantage of crowds and activity where two more strangers would hardly be noticed. They left that night, traveling cross-country rather than by road to avoid checkpoints. As they rode through the darkness, Nora asked, "Did the marshal believe you?" "He's looking into it," Xavier replied. "He's a cautious man, but fair from what I could tell. The evidence was compelling enough that he couldn't dismiss it outright." "But not compelling enough to clear me immediately," Nora observed. "These things take time. The law moves slowly, especially when it involves powerful men like Richardson." Nora was silent for a while, then said quietly, "What happens after? If I'm cleared? If I'm not?" Xavier hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. "If you're cleared, you can start fresh, anywhere you want. If not," he hesitated, "there are places beyond the reach of territorial law. Mexico, Canada." "And you?" Nora pressed. "Where will you go?" The question caught him off guard. "I haven't thought about it." "Don't you ever get tired of running?" she asked, her voice softened by the darkness around them. "Of having no home, no connections?" Xavier didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he had been tired for a long time. Tired of the solitude, of the constant vigilance, of the reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. But he had accepted it as the price of his choices. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "but it's the life I've chosen." "Or the life that chose you," Nora suggested, "after what happened in El Paso." Virginia City was exactly what they needed, a chaotic, thriving mining town where fortunes were made and lost daily and where newcomers arrived constantly. Mrs. Abernathy's sister, a widow named Clara Wilson, welcomed them with practical efficiency, asking few questions but providing clean beds and hot meals. They settled into an uneasy waiting pattern, both aware that their future hung on Marshal Jenkins's investigation. They couldn't risk being seen together in public, so Xavier took daily walks through town alone, listening for news and watching for signs that their presence had been noticed. On the third day, he encountered Rebecca Taylor in the market. She had come to Virginia City to visit family and was as surprised to see Xavier as he was to see her. "Mr. Stone," she greeted him nervously, "I didn't expect to find you here." "Likewise," he replied. "Are you well?" She glanced around before speaking in a low voice. "I went to the marshal's office in Carson City, told them about Mason." Her hands twisted anxiously in her skirt. "I wasn't the only one. There were 3 other women there, all telling similar stories." Hope surged through Xavier. "The marshal believed you." "He listened," Rebecca said, "took detailed statements, asked about Judge Richardson's involvement." She hesitated. Is she safe?" "Miss Daniels?" "For now," Xavier confirmed. "Thank you for coming forward. It took courage." Rebecca smiled faintly. "It was time someone did. After you left, I kept thinking about what you said about an innocent woman hanging because the rest of us stayed silent." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "I don't want that on my conscience." The news was encouraging. If Jenkins was actively taking statements and investigating Richardson's connection, it suggested he was taking the case seriously. But it didn't guarantee a favorable outcome, and the waiting continued to wear on both Xavier and Nora. Their forced proximity in Clara's small house created a different kind of tension. Xavier found himself increasingly aware of Nora, her quiet strength, her quick mind, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled. They spent long evenings in conversation, sharing stories of their lives before their paths had crossed. Nora spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's death from lung sickness contracted in the coal mines, her journey west seeking opportunity. Xavier, usually guarded about his past, found himself revealing more than he had to anyone in years: his youth in Texas, his brief career as a lawman, the idealism he had once possessed. On the seventh night of their stay, as they sat on Clara's small back porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Nora asked, "Have you ever thought about stopping, finding a place to settle?" Xavier considered the question. "A man with my reputation doesn't settle easily." "Reputations can change," Nora pointed out. "People can change." "Can they?" Xavier looked at her, genuinely curious about her answer. "I have," she said simply. "A month ago, I was a respectable secretary who believed in the system. Now I'm a fugitive who broke into a bank and stole documents." She smiled wryly. "If I can change that much, surely the infamous ghostwriter could become something else if he wanted to." The idea was both appealing and terrifying to Xavier. He had been running for so long that he wasn't sure he remembered how to stop. Yet something about Nora made him want to try to imagine a different future than the lonely path he'd been following. Before he could respond, Clara appeared at the door, her expression grave. "There's a marshal's deputy in town showing your picture," she told Nora, "asking if anyone's seen you." Xavier tensed immediately. "Just one deputy?" "So far," Clara confirmed. "But word spreads fast in Virginia City." "We need to leave," Xavier decided. "Now, before they have time to organize a proper search." "Where will we go?" Nora asked, rising to her feet. "We've already left Elko and Carson City." "North," Xavier suggested. "Into the mountains. We can find a place to hole up until we hear from Jenkins." They gathered their few belongings quickly. Clara provided them with food and extra blankets, concerned about the cold mountain nights. "Be careful," she warned. "Early snow is possible this time of year. Don't get caught unprepared." They slipped out of Virginia City as dusk deepened into night, avoiding the main roads and taking game trails into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through rocky passages and dense pine forest. By midnight, they had climbed high enough to look back and see the lights of Virginia City twinkling in the distance. The air was noticeably colder, their breath fogging in the moonlight as they made camp in a sheltered hollow. "We should be safe here for a while," Xavier said as he built a small, well-shielded fire. "No one will search this far up without good reason." Nora huddled close to the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What if Jenkins's investigation doesn't clear me? What if we're just delaying the inevitable?" "Then we keep moving," Xavier replied. "Find somewhere beyond their reach." "Together?" Nora asked, the question hanging between them. Xavier looked at her across the fire, unable to deny any longer what had been growing between them during their time together. "If that's what you want." "Is it what you want?" she challenged gently. Instead of answering with words, Xavier moved to sit beside her. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. Nora leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The kiss, when it came, was tender, questioning at first, then deepening as Nora responded with unexpected passion. Xavier pulled her closer, the warmth of her body against his more comforting than any fire in the cold mountain night. When they finally broke apart, Nora rested her forehead against his. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "When you found me hiding in those hills outside Elko, I never imagined." "Nor did I," Xavier admitted. "I've been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to care for someone." They spent the night talking, planning, sharing dreams that had seemed impossible only weeks before. Perhaps if Nora was cleared, they could start somewhere new, Oregon or California. Places where Xavier's reputation might not follow them so closely. Places where they could build something together. For the first time in years, Xavier allowed himself to hope for a future that wasn't defined by solitude and vigilance. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope made a man vulnerable. But looking at Nora, hearing the quiet certainty in her voice as she spoke of possibilities, he found he was willing to risk it. Morning brought clear skies and a decision to remain in their mountain camp for a few days. at least until they could determine whether the deputy's presence in Virginia City was part of a larger search. Xavier ventured down toward the town each day, careful to remain unseen, gathering information from observing the increased law enforcement activity. On the fourth day, as he was returning to camp, he spotted riders on the trail below 3 men, moving with purpose, following tracks that Xavier realized with a sinking feeling must be his own. The posse had found their trail. He raced back to the camp, finding Nora preparing a simple meal from their dwindling supplies. "We've got company," he said tersely. 3 riders, maybe 30 minutes behind me." Nora's face paled, but she moved quickly, gathering their belongings. "Can we outrun them?" "Not on this terrain," Xavier replied, thinking rapidly, "but we can split up. Make them choose which trail to follow." "No," Nora said firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." "It's not a sacrifice," Xavier argued. "I know these mountains. I can lose them, then circle back to find you." But Nora was adamant. "We stay together. If they take us both." There was no time to argue further. They mounted quickly and headed higher into the mountains, following a steep trail that would be difficult for pursuers, but not impossible. Xavier hoped to find a defensible position, somewhere they could see the posse coming and have options for escape. They had climbed for perhaps 20 minutes when the first shot rang out a warning, fired into the air. The posse had spotted them and was gaining ground. "Halt in the name of the law," a voice called from below. "Nora Daniels, Xavier Stone. You're surrounded." Xavier pulled his horse to a stop in a small clearing, gesturing for Nora to do the same. From their position, he could see the 3 riders below 2 deputies he didn't recognize, and, surprisingly, Marshal Jenkins himself. "That's far enough," Xavier called back, his hand hovering near his gun. "State your business, Marshal." Jenkins urged his horse forward a few paces, keeping his hands visible. "I need to speak with Miss Daniels. It's important." "So important you brought armed men to a peaceful conversation?" Xavier challenged. "Standard procedure when pursuing fugitives," Jenkins replied calmly. "But I give you my word, no one will shoot if you don't draw first." Xavier glanced at Nora, who nodded slightly. They had few options, and Jenkins had been fair in their previous meeting. "We're coming down," Xavier announced. "Slowly." They descended the trail cautiously, stopping a safe distance from the lawman. Jenkins dismounted, approaching on foot with his hands still visible. "Miss Daniels," he began, addressing Nora directly, "I've concluded my investigation into Edward Mason's activities and the circumstances of his death." Nora sat straighter in her saddle. "And?" "The evidence is compelling," Jenkins continued. "Multiple women have come forward with testimonies that corroborate the information in Mason's journals. Additionally, we've uncovered financial records showing payments to silence previous complaints." He paused. "Judge Richardson has been temporarily removed from the bench pending a federal investigation into corruption." Hope flickered across Nora's face. "Does that mean—" "The charges against you have been modified," Jenkins confirmed. "Based on the evidence, the territorial prosecutor has agreed to reduce the charge from murder to justifiable homicide in self-defense." Xavier felt tension. He hadn't realized he was carrying release from his shoulders. "She's free to go?" "After she makes a formal statement in Carson City," Jenkins clarified. "There will be a hearing, but it's largely a formality at this point. The evidence of Mason's pattern of behavior and the immediate threat to Miss Daniels is overwhelming." Nora swayed slightly in her saddle, the relief momentarily weakening her. "It's over. Really over?" "It's over," Jenkins confirmed. "You can come back to Carson City without fear of arrest or persecution." The ride back to Carson City was quiet. Each of them absorbed in their own thoughts about this unexpected turn of events. Xavier watched Nora carefully, concerned about her silence. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly when they had fallen behind the marshal slightly. Nora shook her head. "Just trying to believe it's real, that I don't have to run anymore." She looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "What about you?" now that I'm not a fugitive needing your protection. Now I have a choice to make, Xavier finished for her. We both do. In Carson City, the formal proceedings were indeed largely a formality. Nora gave her statement describing in detail Mason's attack and her actions in self-defense. The territorial prosecutor, a serious man named Harrington, listened attentively before officially recording the reduction in charges. "Miss Daniels," he said when the paperwork was complete, "on behalf of the territorial government, I offer our apologies for your ordeal. It's clear that the system failed you and other women who were victimized by Edward Mason." Nora accepted the apology with grace, though Xavier could see the lingering hurt and anger beneath her composed exterior. No official apology could erase the trauma she had endured or the weeks she had spent as a hunted fugitive. As they left the courthouse, Xavier asked, "What will you do now?" "I don't know," Nora admitted. "I can't stay in Carson City, too many memories. And Elko," she shook her head. "I'm not sure I could feel safe there either, knowing Richardson still has supporters." "You mentioned Oregon once," Xavier reminded her. "Green valleys, mild winters." "I did," Nora agreed, a small smile forming. "It sounds peaceful." Xavier took a deep breath, taking the biggest risk of his life. "I've been thinking. I have some savings, not much, but enough to buy a small piece of land. Maybe start a horse ranch." He met her eyes directly. "Would you consider coming with me? Starting fresh together?" The smile that spread across Nora's face was answer enough, but she stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. "I was hoping you'd ask. I don't want to start over alone." "It won't be easy," Xavier warned. "My reputation might follow us for a while." "Then we'll build a new reputation," Nora said confidently. "Together." 2 weeks later, they boarded a stagecoach bound for Portland, Oregon. Their possessions were few clothes, some books Nora couldn't bear to part with, Xavier's well-worn saddle, and the horses they had grown attached to during their flight, now following behind the stage in the care of the driver's assistant. As the stage pulled away from Carson City, Nora leaned against Xavier's shoulder, watching the landscape change through the window. "Do you think we'll be happy in Oregon?" she asked. Xavier looked down at her, at the woman who had brought purpose and hope back into his life when he least expected it. "I think we'll be happy anywhere, as long as we're together." Nora smiled, interlacing her fingers with his. The notorious ghost rider, settling down to raise horses, no one would believe it. "Let them doubt," Xavier replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "We know the truth." The journey to Oregon was long but uneventful, giving them time to plan their future in detail. They found a small property near the growing town of Pendleton, 20 acres of good grazing land with a modest cabin that needed work but had potential. The locals were initially wary of the quiet newcomers, especially when rumors of Xavier's past began to circulate, but gradually they were accepted into the community. Xavier's knowledge of horses proved valuable in the region, where good stock was always in demand. Nora, with her organizational skills and quick mind, kept their small business running smoothly, handling the books and correspondence with buyers. Within 2 years, Stone Horse Ranch had established a reputation for quality animals and fair dealing. On a warm summer evening, 5 years after their arrival, Xavier stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Nora in the garden with their 3-year-old son, James, named after her father. Their daughter, Catherine, just 6 months old, slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. Nora looked up, catching his gaze, and smiled that same smile that had captivated him years ago in the hills outside Elko. She said something to James, who ran toward Xavier with the boundless energy of childhood. "Papa! Look what I found!" he exclaimed, holding up a colorful stone. Xavier knelt to examine the treasure, feeling a contentment he had once believed impossible for a man with his past. As James ran back to his mother, Xavier reflected on the strange path that had led him here, from a disillusioned lawman to a notorious gunslinger, to a family man with roots and responsibilities. He thought occasionally of Marshall Jenkins, who had sent a letter last year mentioning that Judge Richardson had been convicted of corruption and removed permanently from the bench. Justice, it seemed, sometimes prevailed after all. Nora joined him on the porch, Catherine now awake and gurgling in her arms. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, leaning into his side. "How different things might have been if I hadn't seen your wanted poster that day in Elko," Xavier replied honestly. "I would have been caught eventually," Nora said, "probably hanged. And I would have continued drifting," Xavier added, "always alone, always watching my back." Nora shifted Catherine to her other arm, looking out at the prosperous ranch they had built together. "Instead, here we are. Who would have thought that finding me hiding from the law would lead to this?" Xavier put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her and their daughter closer. "I went looking for a fugitive and found my future instead." The sun set slowly over their land, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. James ran circles in the yard, chasing fireflies that had begun to emerge in the twilight. From the stable came the soft nickering of horses, the foundation of their new life. "No regrets?" Nora asked quietly. Xavier looked at his family, at the woman who had given him a reason to stop running, at the children who represented a future he had never dared to imagine for himself. "Not a single one," he answered, and meant it with his whole heart. In the distance, a coyote called, a reminder of the wilderness that still existed beyond their fence line. But here, in this moment, Xavier Stone, once the most feared gunslinger in the Nevada territory, was simply a man holding his family, finally at peace with his past and hopeful for the years to come.